Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with RJ, and we're going to review Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is about close to 200 pages. There are 80 pages of information for subclasses and other information dealing with that. 20 pages for group patrons, 35 pages for magic spells and items together. And at the end, 60 pages of Dungeon Master's tools. We're going to go backwards because after reading this book, I've realized that this is a fun book for players. I think players will love all the options available here. But experienced dungeon masters, in my opinion, I think they might become disappointed. So let's go and talk about first dungeon master tools.
The DM section has basically a few sections, right? Session 0, sidekicks, parlaying with monsters, environmental hazards, and puzzles. So starting from the back, the puzzles. This section of the book is really for DMs only, because if you read this, you read the puzzles, you will just know how to solve them. So basically the idea is how to come up with interesting solvable puzzles. It usually takes a lot of effort for a DM to come up with puzzles, right? And if you're going to Google some puzzle to give to your players can Google it as well, right? Or they probably have heard of these things if it's easily Googleable. So here in the book, we've got 13 puzzles, varying difficulties. And there's also for each puzzle, some mechanics for giving people hints, giving your characters hints based on skill checks or skills that they're proficient in, to help them to solve that puzzle. And then there's also some ways to customize each puzzle to fit your specific scenario, so it might hook into your story. My take on this section is actually, this is one of the useful sections of the book for DMs. 13 puzzles is pretty good. You're probably going to use them all. This will save you a lot of time as far as DM preparation if your group enjoys puzzles.
There are things I really like about this chapter. I do like the supernatural regions. I thought that was a nice thing to explain to readers so that whenever they're in a new environment, how their characters may react to that. And I thought that's really great. The sidekicks was a cool thing to add. The option for game masters, so they can, if they're low on players, that they could create, these NPCs to join the campaign. Things like that are great, and I think it's great to have, especially for like new dungeon masters, because there's a lot of learning, I think, in the beginning when it comes to creating an atmosphere and creating a sense of danger. I love the section here about the mimics. When it comes to the magical phenomena, I think that I want to create something like that for my players.
I don't want to be a player in a mimic colony. Yes. So what Manny's referring to is in the environmental hazards, there's these magical phenomena so they are things like eldritch storms, emotional echoes, enchanted springs, magic mushrooms, primal fruits. Mimic colonies is one of them, and for each of those, there's some sort of effects. So these are like great for environmental effects and challenges to bring some mechanics to your settings, which I love the idea of doing this sort of thing, and making the exploration pillar of D&D more robust, because it usually relies a lot on the DM to carry that. The magical phenomena is great. It really gets the creative juices going, and the supernatural regions is actually very, very good, because for each supernatural region, there's a table that has like 10 to 15 different effects that can happen in that region. And it could be something like, if it's like a haunted area, it's going to be something really spooky. Changes happen to your players, or changes happen in the environment. The natural hazards section is pretty disappointing. Basically, it gives you some rules for avalanches, falling into water, and falling onto a creature. And then for every other natural hazard that can occur, like floods, blizzards, earthquakes, it basically just points you to a spell and says, just use the effect of this spell as what happens.
And I wish I would have read this 20, 25, 30 years ago. It would have given me some creative juices to create and have rules for them, because a lot of these, after playing for so long, I have created scenarios like that, like the mirror world. I've done a scenario like that, but I had to homebrew it. I have to just create stuff on the spot. Sidekicks, I wish, again, I would have seen that before, because I've had one or two players sometimes in my campaigns, and I'll just have to make an NPC on the spot. So I've kind of learned to do that. Actually, at times I play this so much that if I need to make an NPC, I can just make the stats like
Right.
on the spot right there.
I actually don't really like the sidekick section that much. So, I mean, it's useful to have an NPC that's basically a hero, as a sort of semi-hero. And for one or two player games, it might make sense. But, and the classes for everybody who doesn't have the book are expert, spellcaster, and warrior. Those are the three types of sidekicks you can have. And they're intended to be with the party for a long time. So they have this mechanic that they level up along with the party, which is why you're not just going to the monster manual and grabbing spy or scout or something. I think it's almost as much work as maintaining a full player character, because they get their class features and they pick spells, and you have to level them up in almost in the same way. And honestly, I would rather just go to D&D Beyond and create a character and just maintain it there. But so I didn't think this was too useful, but I did like some of the features in the sidekick classes. I wonder if I could dip into some of these multi-class into some of these sidekick classes. Parlaying, I don't think it needed a section. It's only a couple pages, but basically it answers the question, how can a character know what a given monstrosity desires, or a dragon or a beast wants? If you've ever had this question come up, you have an interesting campaign going, and do you really need mechanics for that? I don't think so.
I don't think I've ever not been in a campaign where some sort of communication hasn't been. I mean, unless you're running a campaign with just mindless monsters the whole time. I can't see that scenario ever not happening in a campaign. I don't know. Even as something as going back to Middle Earth a little bit, but even in like a situation where there's like orcs and goblins attacking a village, I've seen players just stand up and say, "Hey, listen, let's try to make peace," and then that's where persuasion and or intimidation, roles like that come into play. So to me, that's not very necessary, but I can see why maybe they put in it. Again, I think if you're a new dungeon master, that gives you an option so that you don't have to do a hack and slash campaign. But if you've been playing for a long time, parlaying, that's like almost, it happens all the time.
Yeah, it's basically, what's my motivation for a monster? And if you have a villain monster, like a dragon or something, you're going to know what their motivation is, I hope. Or you can come up with something pretty easily. Although I never considered what oozes want, so this has raised some questions in my mind. The last section, or the first section of the Game Master's section, is Session 0. It's only a couple pages, and it describes how to run a Session 0, forming a party, etc. The most important part of this is probably the part about the social contract. Coming to an agreement as to what's allowed, how people want to play, what's acceptable behavior at the table, and how to communicate. But honestly, do we need this in Tasha's? No, we don't. There's plenty of community content out there describing how to run Session Zeros. So if you have an internet connection, you probably don't need this part of the book.
Okay, then let's talk about the magic spells and item section. What they call magic miscellany.
47 new magic items, right? 4 common, 12 uncommon, 19 rare. So there we go for the tier 1 and 2. You've got a good number of them. Then you've got 5 very rare, 1 legendary, and then you actually have 6 artifacts. I'm never going to use artifacts, so I don't really care about those, but some people really enjoy that, and they tie into the story of the worlds. The tattoos are a new form of magic item. They've been in Unearthed Arcana, but those I think are fun and interesting. I would love to add those to any game. The shards also are interesting. There are sorcerer spellcasting focus that adds some extra goodness depending on what sort of shard it is. And I think there's useful magic items for just about every class in this collection. So I'm very positive on this section.
When it comes to the spells, I like the summoning spells. I thought that was a good idea.
I was surprised about the summoning spells. There's 21 spells in this book. 9 of them are summoning spells, right? That's a huge number of them. They go across classes though, right? So not all the summoning spells are just wizard spells. So you've got some useful spells in here, but in total, wizard gets them all, right? Wizard gets 19 of the 21.
Yeah.
Warlock gets 15, so that's pretty good. If you're playing a warlock, you have 15. Sorcerer gets 11. Artificer gets 7. Ranger gets only 3. Druid gets 3. Cleric gets 2, and Paladin only gets 2. And if you're playing a bard, don't buy this for the spells because you get 1 spell in this book.
If I had one major complaint about this section is that it's way too small. I wish there were more spells and more magic items.
And there's one little section tucked at the end of the spells, which is personalizing spells, which basically says you have permission to describe how your spells look in a different way. And they give you some themes you could use, very abstract. This section is not very terribly useful, but maybe if you're a new DM, it never occurred to you that, hey, players can change things to make them more interesting. That could be good to have in print, I suppose.
Group patrons. It's not a bad section. If you're a new dungeon master or game master, it's a very good section. It gives you kind of more like, in my opinion, like adventure seeds or adventure ideas. Instead of just having a random party going to the bar and trying to find a quest there, you could develop much more interesting campaigns. Maybe you're a university wants you to find an artifact, and you'll have these like Indiana Jones type adventures, or a church may want you to find an artifact and want to you may have traveled to a extraplanar region to retrieve it, or a corporation of some sort, kind of like Acquisitions Inc., where you can you work for a group for money, and you're trying to handle things in a very Discworld way, where make fun of business. But it's not a bad section. Personally, it didn't really give me anything new to work with, because I played long enough where I've done almost many of these types of scenarios already.
So this section was interesting to me because basically the summary of this section is, hey, players, you can work for someone. Which is a great idea and is the setting for most campaigns, I would imagine, and for most fiction. And in a lot of other games, this is sort of the default. I mean, if you played Star Wars, West End games, Star Wars, right? You basically work for the rebellion or you're a smuggler. That's like the two sort of patrons you might have. But they're tucked at the beginning of this section is actually a very good nugget. There's a jewel, a gem, which is that there's a new rule. It says that every PC, every player character can give encouragement or advice to another party member that they can see or hear, and grant them advantage on a roll that they have to make. So basically, it's like giving DMs inspiration to another teammate, and you can do that once long rest. Now, it's in this section because it says because you're working together as part of a team, as part of a patron's organization, you can do this for each other. Honestly, I would just take this rule and say anybody can do it at the table, no matter what your situation is, patron or no patron. That sounds awesome. New house rule going forward. That is a great thing to find in here, and maybe you were already doing it at your table. If you were, excellent. I wasn't, because it didn't occur to me, so this is new to me. There are some patrons in here that are interesting for developing DM ideas. So if you're not getting inspired from fiction or from any other place, you might look at this and say, okay, here's the list of patrons. It's academy, aristocrat, military force, religious order, like you mentioned, and a few others. And for each one of those, you're going to get 6 different types of each of those things, like 6 different types of academies, 6 different types of aristocrats. And you're going to get also 6 possible quests for each one, not details, just like generalized, like you mentioned, like go and get this artifact. Go and prevent this rival from doing something. Those are really great for putting together adventure ideas or campaign ideas for a DM if you're not getting inspiration from anywhere else.
So let's talk about the most popular thing, which are the subclasses. There's 80 pages of options. To me, what stands out, and I wish there was more information, I feel like there was only like 2 pages, is the customization section, where you can if you don't want to play the typical race, typical class, even, it gives you permission, in a sense, so that you could switch things around, which I think is great. A lot of subclasses. I've noticed that the team at Dungeons and Dragons watch a lot of TV, a lot of movies, because if you want to play an Iron Man character, Artificer Armor is for you. You want a Disney-like scenario, Bard, College of the Creation, that's for you. Want to play a Jedi? There's a lot of psionic options out there for you. Psy Warrior, for example, for fighters. For me, I like the subclasses that are more original. The Barbarian, Path of Wild Magic, I think that's fantastic that when they go on a raid, some sort of random burst of magic happens. My only downside to it, in my opinion, is that I wish the chart that you could roll on it was much larger. There's only 8 things that may happen. I wish there were it was that was I wish it was like a D100 scenario. Paladin over the Watchers, the idea that Paladins can now turn extraplanar creatures. I think that's a fantastic idea. There's a lot of like potential good stories that may come from that. And Sorcerer Clockwork Soul, that is really interesting. The idea that you sort of play with time, and you could use it to help heal yourself or your companions, and change advantage and disadvantage. To me, sounds a lot of fun.
Yeah, when I looked at this section, this is of course the main headline for most of Tasha's reviews, right? Is what can the characters get? The character options here are first of all, you have feats, right? You get 15 new feats, and these feats are really great. We've seen them in Unearthed Arcana, and I think some of them might be reprints too. Also, I forgot to mention, there's a lot of reprints in this book from other books. It's a 15 new feats, and there's really useful ones that open up some great character options. So, for example, you can dip into fighter basically by taking fighting initiate. Lets you pick a fighting style from a fighter. There's Poisoner. It's a great attempt to make poison actually a playable option, which until now it's been sort of a pain to use poison in any way. Eldritch Adept lets you basically dip into Warlock and pick up an Eldritch Invocation from Warlock as a feat. So this section is super useful for, I think, almost every player. Classes, okay, you get a new class, the Artificer. Well, you get a full class, I should say, Artificer, and it's got 4 subclasses. But all the other classes also get optional class features bolted on, not just subclasses, but they also get optional class features to your existing class. And then there's new subclasses for other classes. There's at least 2 for each one. Some of them have 3. The fighter, if you're playing a fighter and you get this book, you get 7 new maneuvers, right? So if you're playing a battle master, you get 7 new maneuvers to work with. That's pretty good. Rangers, if you have the Beastmaster feature, you can swap out your Ranger's Companion to get Primal Companion, which basically gives you a beast companion that levels up with you or scales in power with your level. Warlocks get 8 new Eldritch Invocation options. So if you're playing a Warlock and you're not happy about the spells you're getting a lot of spells in this book, but you're also getting 8 Eldritch Invocation options. 2 for Pact of the Tome and 1 for Pact of the Chain. And then there's some for a new pact, and then just some that don't require any pact. And then finally, those optional class features, just about 3 to 4 new features for every class. They let you, first of all, they add new spells to your class spell lists. So that opens up a lot more for your spell selections. They usually have some sort of versatility feat, which lets you change choices you made when you leveled up in the past, whether that's like cantrips you picked or maneuvers you picked or things like that. You get to swap them out at certain levels. And then there's some new features too, and some of them are really great. I think they're going to thrill a lot of people, and I hope people get to use them because they're pretty exciting. The customizing your origin section is, since the beginning of the book, people have talked about it a lot. I'll just say that changing a skill section, it just says talk to your DM about changing a skill. Okay, I think we've been doing that. If you want to change a subclass, talk to your DM. It gives you some downtime and gold pieces to play with for doing that, but I think most DMs could have just worked that in somehow without needing this section. The most important part is making your custom lineage, aka race. Gives you some guidelines for making that. That is pretty useful for keeping things balanced. That is pretty useful, both for a DM and for a player. The DM wants to make a custom race for their world. Here's some guidelines that might help keep things under control.
Overall, how did you feel about the book? Would this be something now that you've read? Would you buy it again?
Well, I did buy it, so it worked. Whatever marketing that was out there, it worked. The thing that sells this book to players are the feats, the optional class features, and the new subclasses. Those are the 3 reasons that players should get this. For DMs, I think the puzzles are worth looking at. Environmental hazards and magic items are all worth it for DMs. Maybe group patrons too, depending on if you need some inspiration. The rest is okay or totally not necessary. And honestly, I would recommend that people buy it digital and content share with your playing group, right? So DM buys it and then he shares it, content shares it on D&D Beyond with his playing group so that they can use the character options and spells and everything in their character sheets.
I feel that this book, when I will only use it, or our party will only use it just for the subclasses mainly, and then back maybe at times look at the magic items and spells. Um, I think again, experienced dungeon masters will look at this, will read it once, and except for the puzzles, I agree. I think the puzzles will interest them the most. But honestly, just like the DMG, I think honestly, it's something that you read once and then you just kind of put away. Um, it's I think new dungeon masters though will get a kick out of it, and I think I hope that if they ever make a new edition, they take a lot of these rules that are in there, a lot of the options, and put them in the DMG. Because I feel like that this should have been really in the DMG.
Yeah, I think DMs will benefit from this book. Not just puzzles, but the environmental hazards, I think,
Mm.
will be useful. Not the natural ones, but the supernatural regions. I think that's a pretty good reason to get this book, and the magic items are good reasons to get this book. But like I said, buy one copy and share it with your entire group, because not everybody's going to need to have this in their bag to
Mm.
study or use.
Thank you everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed our review for Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Please support the channel, and have a great day.